Hey there, and welcome back to the Total Potential Podcast. It's Cole. I'm excited today to be joined by my friend and fellow coach, Bret Magpiong. He is the founder of the Radius Strategies Group and the author of the brand new book, The Delta Theorem, an innovative framework for being fully alive and truly wealthy. I cannot wait to share with you some of the insights that he has, the way he uses this Delta Theorem to really make impactful change in a way that we can understand how one part of the effort we make along with another part of the effort we make and the mindset shifts that we have really lead to exponential change. So I can't wait to get started. Let's welcome Bret to the podcast.
Bret, thanks so much for being here with me today.
Love being here. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and congratulations. This is big. Your first book.
It is.
How does it feel?
It feels scary, exciting,
Yeah.
as well as somewhat overwhelming to a certain degree. I mean, scary because, as you put your heart out there and you have the world to kind of like open the door into you, and scary because that door might get closed in your face. You have no idea. So that's a little bit scary. Exciting because this is a goal that I had set for myself many, many years ago. I wanted to write a book before the age of 60. I turned 60 on March 10th of this year, and literally the author or the publisher's proof was sent back to me on like February 28th or so. So
oh my gosh,
isn't that
cool
amazing?
is that?
So that was pretty exciting to be able to, reach a goal that was a long time in the making, and overwhelming because there's a lot that goes into getting a book out there. Just engaging with people and marketing and things that I just had usually other people take care of me in my career. And now I'm doing them myself. I'm a solopreneur is what I'm hearing these days. So it's pretty interesting.
It's awesome. And, for anyone listening, the writing a book is a really super cool process. And a super steep learning curve. So anyone who's interested, take it on. It's such a cool experience. There's so much to learn. There's so much to learn about yourself, but be ready to learn things you just didn't maybe even know you needed to know in order to write a book. So it's quite a process.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Everything from how many times I rewrote something to get that one word in there that just didn't really quite fit. That's just the writing process. I found myself with what I felt were some sacred nuggets, things that I just really loved. And the more that I read it, it just didn't fit. And so being able to use that cut and not paste, but just cut and delete was really kind of an interesting part of the process, So there are obviously the things that are in there. I love it, from that perspective. But there's just some things that are really challenging inside that you just learn, I can't hold on to that one. I might love it, but it just doesn't feel right. So
an exercise in letting go for sure.
Oh, gosh, for sure.
Okay, so the Delta Theorem. I love this work, and I've had a chance to experience some of this work through collaboration with you in the past. But give us a little insight. How did you ever come to a place where this process mattered to you? What are some of the things the work that led you to even discover this is a methodology that works? What are some of the informative events that led you to even want to share this or want to use it in your own life or with others?
Yeah, let me, it's easily answered by a couple paths that somewhat converged, if you will. So my professional career has been working with very, very well-off individuals, people that have uber wealth. It just happened to be the niche that I found myself in and have served in that niche for 35 years. Everything from people that were able to purchase Major League Soccer franchises to flying on the Boeing business jet, which is like the Air Force One, except private. And I say that with all humility. It just so happened to be that that's where I landed. And what I found was that not always, but many times, people with that level of wealth, my clients, there was always something more. So there's financial wealth, and then there's the wealth of relationship, or the wealth of legacy, or the wealth of time. These were constant things that kept coming up. You know, what's the money going to do to my kids? That was a common thing that I heard. Or I don't feel like I have time anymore. Or, you know, what's my legacy going to be, and all these kinds of things. So that was just this thread in my professional life that I was finding. And of course, you know, I wanted to not just be a wealth manager. I wanted to be a true wealth manager inside of that, right?
Yeah, not just the money.
That's right. Not just the money, because that's what they wanted.
Yeah.
They wanted things that were more. What I also found is that I live in Los Angeles, and my daily grind was get up, work out, kiss my wife, kiss the dog, kiss my daughter, not in that order, drop her off to school. And then I would get on the freeway, and I'd be driving on the LA freeway to go into work, and I'd get stuck in traffic. And I remember this feeling that was just kind of a sigh, like, really, this is it? There's got to be more. There just has to be. And while my story, like all of our stories, feels really big, I mean, career, family, community, church life, all these various things, raising a daughter, they're all big story things. They still felt like a small story kind of thing. And so I felt like that sigh was like, there's a larger story that's going on here. And I know that we are kind of called to tap into it, but I don't know how to necessarily do that. So those were like the two kind of, if you will, worldviews that were like, you know, kind of percolating along. I'm a reader. I believe that, you know, standing on the shoulder of giants, which is people who have come before, who have written some amazing things, is fantastic. And so I read a lot. And what I didn't necessarily have is this kind of integration of a lot of things that I was reading into a framework that I could use for myself, use for clients, use for my daughter, use in general. And so that's really the genesis of what the Delta Theorem is all about. It's this feeling like there's got to be something more. I remember I heard a quote once, and it said, don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive, and go do that. Because what the world needs is you fully alive.
Yeah.
And this notion of like coming fully alive, like how do we come fully alive, was really what the genesis of the Delta Theorem was all about.
Yeah. Something that I really love about the way this is communicated from your perspective is, to your point, there can be all of these ideas, and they're out there, and they feel like they're almost like floating in space. And you could look at any one of them, let alone the collection of them, and be like, okay, that's great, but how? How do I do that? I love that as an idea, but what's the actual experience of that?
Right.
And I think something that really resonates for me about this work is that, um, not that it's mathematical, but that there is this like path you can walk. There is this process you can go through to take action on what is otherwise just an idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. So walk us a little bit through the theorem itself. Like, what does what does that framework
Yeah.
look like for you?
Yeah. So I'll probably scare you. Well, you've heard it before. I'll scare others when they hear me just kind of talk about this theorem, because the theorem itself, it looks like a math equation. Okay, but just go with me on this.
Yeah.
And the equation looks like this, just spoken: alpha over p cubed by e f squared equals delta. And I just like, yeah, exactly. Everyone's eyes just roll up in their head.
All right. So walk us through the steps of that.
Exactly.
What
What does it
okay.
mean?
But I love this though, because so something I love about that, it looks like a math equation, sounds like a math equation, is that our minds understand that.
Yeah.
Our minds say, I have this input over this other thing. I'm going to use this other thing to amplify it. And then I'm going to get this products.
That's
Our
correct.
brains understand that. But so walk us through what those different aspects are.
Exactly. That's exactly it. It is a equation really to simply help people remember some of the key elements inside of this framework. So here's what it says. Alpha is the first letter in the Greek alphabet. And so what I use it for inside the theorem is to remind people of their primary purpose, their one thing, their reason for being. It sits on top of a foundation of P cubed, which represents a person's priorities, their principles, and their passion. That in fact, what you find, or what I have found, is that purpose comes to being or into life when you have a foundation of understanding your priorities, your principles, and your passion. One of the things that I inside of my coaching or just managing people is that, this big question, I could say to you, Cole, tell me what your purpose is. And invariably what I would get is people with eyes that were deer in headlights. And they would say, I have no idea. It's too big of a question. And by the way, if I tell you what it is, does that mean that I lose the option of it being something different in the future? And that is very unsettling for people, is to say, I am actually stating what my purpose is, let alone the humility, that comes into people not feeling like they want to say that. Yeah. So I don't start there. What I do is I start with the P cubed. I say to you, Cole, what are your priorities? And you say, well, Bret, I'm married. I have kids in grammar school. I have a job. I'm dropping kids off all the time. There's sports, and these are all things that are like life events that you've got going on that say something about your priorities. Those are easy to tie out, to tease out, right? And they change. They change over time. When you're single, maybe you're trying to find you're single, you're trying to find a spouse, or you're just starting out your career, or you're retired. And now your life event is very different. You're a grandparent, or you're wanting to give back, or whatever the case is. So priorities, when tied in with things like life events or life stages or life eras, which I talk about in the book, is the way that priorities come into play.
Yeah.
But then you have principles. Cole, what do you stand for? Yeah. What are the things that are non-negotiables for you? Now, we all have principles, but oftentimes we don't declare them.
Totally.
Don't state them. We know they're there, but they're not really stated. So one of mine, for instance, is let your yes be yes and your no be no. That's a principle that I try to live by. I'm not always that great at it, but I try to live by that. I know that that is one of those things that is a non-negotiable. I try to make it what I stand for in terms of how I show up with people, when I give my word, when I say no. By the way, let your no be no means that sometimes you can say no. It's okay.
Yeah.
That's not a bad thing, right?
Right.
So, now I got the principles there. And then finally, passion is, I can ask you, what sets your hair on fire? What is it that whatever situation you find yourself in, you just you have to do it? I go to any graduation ceremony, and what do we hear from the commencement speaker, or whatever the case is follow your passion, right? And it's good and it sounds good, but it's also somewhat dangerous. Those of us with kids, like I have, a daughter who's 24. If I just tell her to follow her passion, she could follow it, right down a path that leads her in places that she doesn't necessarily want to be in. I had a passion for athletics when I was a kid. I'd love to have been a professional, sports player. And suddenly my priorities came into I was, married. I had a family. I had some responsibilities. Not bad. Those are all good things that I loved. They were passions also from that standpoint. And it steered me into something else. Listen, it's not about follow your passion. It's more like cultivate your passions. I started in my career, I didn't think that I would be a wealth manager. I wasn't like, oh, I want to so badly be a wealth manager. What I found was that inside of the wealth management, I was able to lead people. And when I had people that I was responsible for, that what got cultivated and discovered was a passion for inspiring people to just come alive. That's where my passion lies, inspiring people to come alive. It wasn't because I was a wealth manager.
Sure.
It's because inside of the forum, if you will, that I had, I cultivated what I really loved to do. And so when I found myself leading people, that's what I would do. All right. Those are the 3 Ps, or the PQ'd.
Yeah.
If you think about them from Olympic rings that overlap, right in the middle, where all those 3 rings overlap, that's where the alpha comes in. That's the powerful why. Because now you can start to see where, oh, my passions and my principles and my priorities overlap. And it can suddenly become more apparent to somebody that their powerful why or their purpose starts to come into being. And remember, like I said, with priorities, those change. So this notion of optionality, like I can lose my optionality on purpose. Guess what? Your purpose can change over time. It can change. Yours has, mine has. Yeah. Now, there's some things that are like, I feel like inspiring aliveness has been a portion of me, going way, way back. Okay, great. But my purpose now might be to ensure that my daughter, who's just launching, is well equipped to be able to let her yes be yes and her no be no, and to pursue what she loves to do and find out what that is, in the context of she's young, she's single, she's out of the house, and she's just starting out inside there. So that's that side of it.
Yeah. Can I pause for 1 second? Because
Yes.
something that stands out to me about the way you're describing this, and I love that you use the example of your own career in wealth management, which is that you can find, I think a lot of times when people are doing this work and they're coming to the place where they're like, okay, this is the thing that sets me on fire. This is what I feel like my purpose is. It often feels like their whole life might need to change. Their whole career might need to change in order to actually align themselves to that. But what I hear from your description is that actually you can find those things exactly where you are.
Where you are.
Yes, which I think is very empowering and exciting, because then it's like, oh, interesting. If I just start to turn my eyes even on those things, what are my priorities? Where am I spending my time? Like starting to even bring these things into awareness, all of a sudden I can do this from exactly where I'm standing, which is
That's
super
right.
exciting, and it's
That's
a
right.
lot less scary.
That's right. That is absolutely correct. It's hard because it requires somewhat delayed gratification. Just that's the reality. In an environment where if my light does not go on when I hit that switch immediately, or if my computer doesn't boot up really, really fast, that's the environment we live in. And so that tension I find of like not delayed forever, but just pacing the journey inside of it. And like you said, looking at what you have right now that says, wow, I'm leading 2 people. And when they come into my office, what makes me come alive is to encourage them in their career. That is really where, cultivating what you're interested in, comes to be. So yeah, totally with you.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have our alpha and we have our P cubed. And then we add on.
Yes. So what I found is that, and this happens so often, is that everything I just talked about is kind of theoretical. Big word, whatever the case is. It's theory. Mm-hmm. It's the soft stuff, right? In order for theory to turn into practice, you got to do something with it. You got to take action. So it's alpha over P cubed by multiplied E, which is effort. You've got to put what you've done into action. And that's where having a plan, a training plan, a focus on, various areas that you can just start doing. You and I, we went through some training together, great training, right? And one of the things the key things that stuck out to me, especially around taking action, is the notion of crawl, walk, run. And it kind of goes back to what we just talked about. Too often inside of taking action or even writing out action steps, we write out steps that are running.
Yeah.
Right? Like I am going to do a TED Talk because I want to inspire aliveness.
Yeah.
That's sprinting. That if you're lucky inside there. Crawling is to say the next person who walks in my office, I'm going to look away from my computer. I'm going to look them in the eyes and I'm going to encourage them or figure out what it is that they want, because what really I want to do is to help them come alive inside of what they're doing, right? So crawl, walk, run. Now you got to crawl, walk, and run is all action steps.
Totally.
And so, that's what E is all about. It's the effort. It's converting what I'd say is from your head to your heart, right? And then to your hands and your feet and making it happen, right? So that's effort. We supercharge our purpose, our priorities, principles, our passion by taking effort. Doesn't have to be massive effort. Sometimes it is. There's this notion in the book that I talk about of practice that the Japanese have come up with. It's called misogi. Have you heard of misogi?
No.
Misogi is a practice that is like a crucible event. It puts you in a position where you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Why? Because when you do that, you basically grow inside of that level that you think you can't get to. And so misogi events, for instance, and I talk about these in the book, are crucible events that you might do to put yourself, out there. By the way, crucible events don't have to be physical. In fact, one of the things I talk about inside the book in the area of effort is this concept of what I call the 6 facets. And the 6 facets are 6 core competencies that we as people have about us that are really kind of the critical things to train up. They are spiritual, physical, instinctual, natural, emotional, and mental. Those 6 facets. Why I call them the 6 facets is, if I can share just kind of this analogy, think of a Rubik's Cube. It has 6 sides to it. It's a 3-dimensional object, 6 sides, 6 different colors, 9 tiles. Some of them have more than that, quite frankly.
I know. Oh my gosh.
Crazy. I can't do one, right?
I know, me either.
Crazy. I have to break it apart and put it back together to do it. But the deal is, inside the 6 facets, you think of these 6 core competencies as sides to the Rubik's Cube. I found that my life was not that all my physical was all blue. It was that I found that my life was all like, my physical was interacting with my emotional, was interacting with my mental, was interacting with my instinctual, my spiritual, the natural, all these things. So that, in fact, what's going on is that my life looks more like a Rubik's Cube that's constantly spinning. And instead of me solving for all blue and making myself a physical specimen and a mental, not very emotionally, aware.
Yes.
That the best way to do it is to train myself inside of having those things interact with each other in an integrated fashion. Because when we have a whole integrated 6 core competencies or 6 facets is when we're wholehearted. You've heard this concept of like, hey, you're doing something half-hearted.
Totally. I
want to do stuff wholeheartedly. That's when I feel like coming alive is in there. So developing plans or a misogi plan or whatever that might be physical, but builds in things like oh, that was really hard. That's emotional. That's mental. Oh, I should go this route. That's instinctual, or being outside in nature and just seeing awe when you're doing these kinds of things. That's the natural, and just feeling a transcendent nature of things. That's the spiritual side stuff. By the way, the SPINEM is spinum. because Cole, just like in the Delta Theorem, it's just to help people like remember some of these things.
Totally.
I think Rubik's Cube, spinum, spiritual, physical, instinctual, natural, emotional, mental. I can remember those things when I'm creating, these kinds of things. So, I talk about that inside the book, but that's where taking theory and putting into practice comes into play.
Yeah. Something that I just want to highlight, because I think in this efforting piece that you are mentioning, the opportunity, so something that I think can be very distracting is that when you see that run phase, when you see the thing of like, oh, when I'm doing this at my absolute best, this is what it's going to look like. And the gap between that is enormous, right? If you're at 0 and this thing over here, that's the ultimate, is 100, like it's a long way to traverse. But the crawling is something that I think gets passed over so often. Is imagine yourself in your mind's eye crawling on that thing every single day for a year, and
Yeah.
imagine the person you are at the end of crawling at that for a year.
Yeah.
Like it's easy to bypass. And to your point earlier about kind of there's some delayed gratification on that, right? Because
Yeah.
it feels small. But we can't overlook those small things
Totally
as
agree.
these massive change makers, because they're incredible. So I just
Yeah.
really grateful that you built that piece in there. And then the aspect about the crucibles that, and pause for a second. Brett and I had a chance to do a physical crucible together. And first of all, Brett is an incredible teammate. And I saw him there with some of his buddies and really kind of leading and inspiring, like even within the big group, this smaller group. It was really cool. And, Brett's the kind of guy who he's calling out the count for the whole team so that, you can keep these micro goals, that crawl phase where it's in front of you and you can keep it happening. He's the kind of guy who will help you hold up a sandbag when it feels like you can't hold up the sandbag anymore. Like just, it was a really cool experience to get to do that with you. And those types of crucibles, they're incredible. But to your point, like I know all kinds of people who it's actually easier for them to go do that type of a crucible
Yes.
and challenge the body to its, ultimate than it is to sit down and have a hard conversation with somebody. They would
Yeah.
go do that crucible, the physical crucible, 1,000 times, right? Before they'd go have the conversation that from an emotional perspective is going to be really challenging. And so what is a crucible that actually is a crucible for you?
That's
What
right.
is right? I mean, that's such I really appreciate that you're giving this lens of a broader perspective of what crucible really might mean for any one person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So in an office environment, the crucible could be to have that crucial conversation with a boss or somebody else. Like what am I physically feeling at that time? What is my stomach is tightening. That's the physical side of stuff, being aware of that kind of stuff. Or do I go into it well rested? Or did I eat? Like we think of these physical things, trainings or I do often as, some kind of an event or a running or
Totally.
lifting or whatever the case is. Actually, it's all of the physical things that are going on inside of our body. And when I talk about the 9 tiles, I mean, the reason why I say that is that think of all the attributes that come into physical: stamina, endurance, strength, fueling, sleep, hydration. Like these are all the things that we can start to develop some plans around that kind of thing that has nothing to do with some crucible event like you and I did, but is a real misogi because
Totally.
we have to walk into our boss's or our colleagues' office and have a crucial conversation with them. So absolutely, that is effort. That is the training of the effort. The other thing I'd say is that I heard this analogy recently and I loved it. It was like, think of a thermometer that has, just 1 through 10, all the way up to the top, right? And if you think about that, if you looked at your thermometer and said that right now, my top is 3 because I'm crawling. If you did 2 out of 3, that would be a huge success.
Totally.
If you did 3 out of 3, it would be, you crushed it. And guess what? By the time you get to 3, you are now geared and ready to get to 4. And so that's the crawl, walk, run. Like, let's make our thermometers and the view of our thermometers applicable to where we're at right now. And yet let's make the top, even if it's not 10, it's 3. That is a huge success to get to 3 in whatever you're doing, right now. So yeah, that's critical inside of stuff.
That's beautiful. Okay. So after my effort and making some plans and taking some action, what's next?
Yeah. So what I learned across my life is that effort isn't always successful.
Totally.
And in fact, effort often fails.
Totally.
And so it's alpha over p cubed by e f squared equals delta. And the F stands for failure. But here's where math actually does come into play. Because usually I find that when I think of failure, I immediately think it's a negative. It is a negative to me. And yet when we square a negative in math, it becomes a positive. Strange as that is. I mean, I never understood how minus 12 times minus 12 equals 144. What?
I know. What just happened?
What just happened? Exactly. But that's the fact. And so in the theorem, it's the concept that we square up our failures. We learn from our failures. Because when we learn from our failures, we're put ourselves in the best position to be wise, or to not do that again, or to have our instincts. Instinctual is about pattern recognition. So if we can recognize patterns that we've done, like I did that before, that didn't work, I learned from that, I'm not going to do that again. That's a really great thing, right? So F squared is, what happens inside of failure. Listen, I've had tons of failure. And in fact, in the book, and this is the scary part, I share some of those failures because they're real. I share them also because I learned from them a tremendous amount. And by the way, they're like 1 or 2 examples, 3 examples of like a lifetime of failures, that are just like, oh my goodness, this is scary. When am I going to stop learning? Can I stop?
Right.
I don't want to square up my failures anymore here. So, it's this concept of the learning that comes from failure. That all side of it. So the way that I see the theorem is that the first part is purpose and the second part is performance. So it's kind of purpose and performance. And when I do coaching, it's like purpose and performance coaching, those kinds of things. Like, hey, find out what your powerful why is, because you and I both know when you know your powerful why, you can get through a lot of stuff. If you don't know your powerful why, you're going to quit.
Every day.
Every day.
Yeah.
That's right. So know your powerful why. So go through the process of learning that. But once you learn it, are you doing anything about it? That's the performance side stuff. All right. So all that equals delta. And what delta is again, with the Greek alphabet, delta is the symbol for change. It's the symbol for impact. It's a symbol, from my perspective, of making a difference. And so the theorem is, how can I make a difference?
Yeah.
I'm sitting there on the 405, and that's the freeway in LA. And I have that sigh that comes over me. And usually what is coming after the sigh is, I want to make a difference. That's what I kind of feel like. Coming alive to me is like having an impact, some way, shape, or form. It doesn't have to be huge. Like I talk about in the book, this concept of the butterfly effect. And the butterfly effect is this notion that a butterfly in South Africa could flap its wings, which could create a ripple of wind that then catches kind of like steam, if you will, over the shores of Johannesburg. It's probably an inland. I don't know. It's hopefully it's on the coast. I don't know. Sorry for those that are from South Africa. I don't know my geography here. But it catches wind and it goes out over the ocean and it catches more wind. And by the time that it gets over to the Caribbean, it actually can change the course of a hurricane that's been going on there. That's the butterfly effect, right? But it has to start with something, with some small impact that we can have. It doesn't have to be huge. It can be any little thing. I work out in the morning, and one of the things that sometimes happens is I'm running on the street, and I'll come across a nail, and I stop and I pick it up, and I throw it away. That looks it doesn't. I'm not saying this because I'm great or anything like that. I literally think to myself, this nail could go into somebody's tire, which could cause them to one, be really upset, cause them some money, could be that they're on their way to the hospital. And just like the impact that picking up a nail can be, that I have no idea. I have no idea what this impact could possibly be. But listen, I see that nail right now. I know what it can do. It can cause a tire to go flat, which is kind of that butterfly effect. So, it doesn't have to be a huge impact. It could be very small. And sometimes it just so happens that it can be a huge impact too. Why not?
Yeah.
Why not? Why not shoot for something that's, could be a really huge impact? Why not?
Yeah. I love that. Our family mission statements on our door walking out of our house, and the last part is that we believe anything is possible. Let's go prove it. Right. It's like, why not?
Why not? Why not?
What would stop you?
What would stop you?
And other than your own internal fear and a little hesitation, that probably is the thing that would stop you. And so why not go?
And it is. And one of the things that I talk about with clients, oftentimes is something that I heard that just had a profound impact on me. And it's called the message of the arrows. Now, let me share the message of the arrows with you. The message of the arrows is that here we have our heart. And, we put our heart out there. I write a book. It's out there. Now, I know I will receive some reviews, probably some from people that I really, that are close to me. And they'll say, yeah, that was good. And it's like an arrow that just, bam, shot right into my heart. That's what it feels like. And it hurts.
Totally.
It hurts, but it is what it is, right? I mean, the arrows come at us. It could be whatever it is, writing a book, going out on a date, and it doesn't work out. And boom, that arrow gets sent. Here's the message of the arrows. We can either choose to say, it's true about me. I'm not a writer. I'm not, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm an imposter inside there. Mm-hmm. In which case, my heart just shrinks back and I protect it. And I say to myself, the message that I learn is, I'll never do that again. I'll never do that again. It hurts too much to put it out there. I'll never, ever go on another date. I'll never, ever write another book. I'll never, ever go on a podcast. I just won't do that, right? And we shrink back and then we just live these lives like, I think it was Emerson said, lives of quiet desperation. Right? Mm-hmm. Instead of, wait a minute. Sometimes the arrow is shot into your strength. That in fact, this is what you were made to do. This is your powerful why. This is your purpose. And if you allow the message of the arrow to shrink you back, you're not actually living in that place of splendor, of what you are, of your place in the larger story, right? That's what can happen. Now, I'm not suggesting that therefore we just put our hearts out there all the time. I mean, there is learning that comes from failure.
Totally.
Right? But what I am saying is that all this stuff does take risk. You've got to be willing to risk putting your heart out there again, right? Because if you're not willing to risk that, guess what happens? It's this life of just like kind of quiet desperation, which I call really the small story. It feels like a big story. My life feels very, very big. And it is, by the way, it is. My marriage, it's big. My parenting, it's big. Walking my dog, to her, it's big, right?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
So it is a big story, but it kind of feels a little bit small, and I could just shrink back into that and never really play a part in that larger story. That's really what the Delta Theorem is all about. It was like saying to a client that has more capital than you could possibly imagine, listen, there is more. There is more. Like, hey, let's talk about what this is doing to your kids. Let's talk about what your priorities. Let's talk about what it is that you want to do with this, this wealth or whatever. Let's talk about your time. Let's talk about, your time, your treasure, your talents. Like, what can you do inside there? And what I found is that not always, because they didn't come to me as like their person that was going to like provide all of this, thought process around that. I was a wealth manager.
Yeah.
I just chose to like go there because we're made to be in relationship, right? And to go there. And what I found is that if it was authentic and it was coming from a place of like, hey, I think you want this, that they would be willing to go there. And then they go at the crawl, walk, run pace. By the way, people with a lot of financial wealth, it's not like they get to run all the time either.
Yeah.
They have to crawl, walk, run too. We're humans.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's the deal. That is what the deal is. So yeah, that's what the Delta Theorem is really all about. That's what I write about. The subtitle of the book is, an innovative framework for being fully alive and truly wealthy, not wealth management, but truly wealthy, inside of these various things. And then I walk through, each chapter talks about, talking about priorities. How do you find them? It's also a workbook, if you will, for people to be able to walk through so many things. Listen, it's best in the hands of a coach, frankly, because it's a framework for a coach to take, clients through, hey, let's go through in the next 6 weeks or whatever the case is, this framework, and let's talk about your priorities, and let's, kind of dive into those kind of things and that kind of stuff. But individually, people can do that too. It's hard, as we all know. We read these books and then like they sit on our shelf, it's like, how do we engage? What do we do to engage? Like if Cole, you were walking through some of your clients with this kind of thing, it's like, you can hold them accountable, or you can, really encourage them inside these kind of, that's what I do with, these kinds of.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that I think is actually a really cool perspective you bring to this kind of work is that because you have had this experience with uber wealth, for so many, right? It feels like, oh, well, it'll feel different when I make this much. It'll feel different when I get into this house. It'll feel different when blah, 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 blah. And you've been on the other side of that where actually doesn't feel different.
Yeah.
And so let's get serious about a more holistic, broader perspective in a way that you can make change that really matters to you.
Right.
So that it's not just you get to this place where, okay, great, I made this sum of money and shoot, my life feels exactly the same. And I, inside feel the same as
Right.
I have all along. So I think it's a really cool perspective that you've already, seen all of that. You don't have to wonder. It's a known fact.
Yeah.
Something that I think is just kind of an interesting frame for our audience to think about this through is, how this might look in a conversation with a child or a teenager or your spouse. Any thoughts that come to mind, in kind of that broader family dynamic, not just I'm looking at the Delta Theorem from my N of one perspective, but maybe I'm, sharing some of these things with my teenage kid who's trying to decide where to go to college or, whatever it might be. What comes up for you in that family dynamic piece?
Yeah. Yes. So I said that this is great in the hands of a coach. It's great in the hands of a parent. I mean, it's great in the hands of a parent. In fact, truth be told, I wrote this book and it's for my daughter. I mean, it literally is, it's for my daughter. Like, hey, Brooke, this is what I've experienced across my life. And this is what I'd love for you to understand about, this kind of process. Now, as a parent, I would sit down and walk her through these things, or I have sat down and walked her through these various things. She's considering where to work and relocate and that kind of stuff. Figuring out what her priorities are, principles, or, her passion. What does she really, want to do, and that kind of thing. It created for us the opportunity to dialogue around what's your why? Why are you doing this? These kinds of things. So from a parental standpoint, it's right down the middle of the fairway if you choose to go there, right? I mean, all these things, they're not complex. Again, the equation, it sounds complex, but it's not math. All it is to have people remember purpose, priorities, principles, passion, effort, and failure.
Yeah.
That's it. Right?
And for kids, there's a huge opportunity for us to reframe failure.
Yes.
Sooner rather than later.
That's right. That is absolutely correct. Yes.
Like, gosh, my daughter, recently she came home and said something about, doing something in math, and math isn't her favorite subject, right? And I stink at that. I don't even want to do it. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Why? Because like the test set a certain like number on the top of the page. Like, are we going to feel something about ourselves based on what a number says, or do we want to learn? I mean, there's just this, it's especially for kids in traditional school, that kind of like you did well or you failed is a pervasive part of the culture. And so even some conversations around that could be so cool and exciting, of just like, let's reframe this, that we can turn these negative, quote unquote, into this powerful positive.
Yeah, I think that is probably, I have found when I've shared this with people, that usually the thing that resonates and they kind of go, aha, wow, that's interesting, is the F squared.
Totally.
It is this notion, because all of us recognize that failure feels negative. It just does. It feels negative. And we also know that if you ask somebody, when did you learn the most? It's when they, failed, yes, or just were inside of some really difficult circumstances, which feels like failure, right? That's when we've learned the most. So this notion of F squared, and just sharing that with our kids, like, hey, listen, yes, things will come and you will fail, but that doesn't have to be the arrow that you learn from that. You're not, there's difference between fail and failure, right? I failed. I'm not a failure.
Absolutely.
It's like, shame and guilt, those kinds of things are similar in notion around that kind of stuff, and so it's the way that we look at those things. So for sure, for kids, sharing it with your spouse, as with anything with a spouse, it's an interesting dynamic, right?
Yeah.
My wife doesn't want to be told necessarily that I have the secret to how she should live.
That's
And
not
by
the
the
most
way,
exciting news she's ever had.
exactly. By the way, Layla, I've got the Delta Theorem here. Let me tell you how you do this. It don't work that way, right? And similarly, I don't necessarily like that either. So, I think that usually it's great in dynamics where there's there's just dynamics where there's maybe authority or kind of responsibility or inside of that kind of stuff. I'm not saying it can't happen on a peer-to-peer basis. It's just, and with anything, those dynamics are more challenging. I can also tell you that it works in a team situation. This is not just for individuals, right? If you wanted to say, like, a company, what's our mission statement? Isn't that our priorities? Like, or our powerful why, or, these kind of things. Aren't principles, like, we have all these things, core values. These are all our core values as a business. Aren't those, your principles? And what is it that we're bringing to market? Isn't that your passion? Like, these things are not just for the individual. They're for organizations and effort and failure and making an impact. I mean, none of these concepts are just for a person. They're for teams of people that can, like, work through these things as well. So, advisors or consultants and that kind of stuff that can work through the Delta Theorem with, an organization, is like, it helps them to understand exactly how they're going to impact or make change or, make a difference in their community or in what they're doing.
Yeah, so cool. Well, so many congratulations, because I know it
Thank
is
you.
no small effort to, put a work of love into the world. So congratulations to you. And thank you so much for taking the time to share it with us, because um, even in the family, it's like, okay, great. I can do this and I can see this. I can see my own version of this. And then maybe I have a really cool conversation with my husband on what the heck are our principles,
That's right.
right? I mean, it's like, maybe it's not maybe the whole theorem isn't unfolding at one time in
Right.
the dynamic, but can we create space where these are the kinds of conversations we get to have? Because then we're more aligned, and then we feel better day to day. And then we're taking actions that are those crawling movements, that you're doing this thing and I'm doing this thing. And all of a sudden, our experience together is so different than it was
Yes.
before.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I just really thank you that it has this very, I mean, yes, it sounds complex, when you say it as a formula, but really there's just these very simple, actionable curiosities that we can have, and then put a little effort behind it, and all of a sudden there's something on the
You got
other
something. You got
side of
something
that.
there. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
The one last thing is that I say is that, this doesn't guarantee change, impact, or make any difference, right? It doesn't. I say that it puts you in a great position for change, impact, or making a difference.
Yeah.
Circumstances can come up that, will make it, challenging. And again, the message of the arrows kind of comes in, like, what am I going to do with that? Right. But putting yourself in the best position to where you can make a difference or change or have an impact, that is, I think, a worthy pursuit. And it's a pursuit that I've done in my life. It's a pursuit that, I encourage those that I'm coaching, to do. And it's a pursuit that I love to be connected with. Like, I know that about you. I know that about you and our community that we've been a part of. There's something really special about knowing when you're locking shoulders, arm in arm with somebody, and they're in the same mindset that's right there. It's really a terrific thing. So yeah.
Yeah, super powerful. Well, thank you so much. And thanks to everybody for listening, and go out and buy Brett's book. So May 23rd, correct, is the big
May
day.
23rd. It'll be
All
on
right.
Amazon.
Beautiful. And we'll make sure that all the, links to purchase and all that good stuff are in our show notes. So thank you, Brett, and everyone for listening. And we will catch you guys next time.